Hello and welcome to GrossiMath.com, where math is for everyone. Today we're going to learn about adding and subtracting in algebra. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you should know is that if you've taken algebra before, you've probably heard the words combining like terms. I went ahead and crossed that right out. And the reason I do that is because, as I always say, math is for everyone. And sometimes these vocabulary words are really intimidating, and we don't have to think of it that way at all. That's just an old-fashioned term for it. What we're really learning to do is add and subtract when we use algebra. So let's go ahead and learn how to do this skill. Okay, so the good news is it's just as easy as regular adding and subtracting. Here I see an expression, okay, and the expression itself is a group of terms. As I always say, the first thing you should do when you see an expression is identify the terms. The next thing we're going to do is understand that when we add and subtract, we're going to work with what they call coefficients. The coefficient of a term is basically the part that's not the variable. So like, for example, here, this positive 2 is the coefficient. Okay? It's the number in front of the variable, the big number. That is technically called a coefficient. Okay? Even that vocabulary is not that important. You can just know that you're dealing with the numbers that are in front of the variables. Okay, what about this one? There is no number here. Well, when there is no number, you can go ahead and put a 1. It's there. It's also implied, okay? So we've spent a lot of time on this channel talking about the implied positive signs. Here we can now learn about this implied coefficient of 1. If there's a variable with no coefficient number listed, believe it, it's an implied 1. So instead of just blank, this one's going to be plus 1x squared. Okay, so this one, the coefficient is positive 1. So again, it's just the number in front of the x, and if it's a blank, it counts as a 1. Okay, well, what about this one? What's the coefficient here? I hope you said negative 3. Well, what about this one? What's the coefficient here? Well, I put in my implied 1. And right there, I'm going to say, okay, it's positive 1. Well, what about these that have no variables? Well, we're going to treat those as their own kind of thing, but we can still take care of this negative 1 and this positive 1. And you'll see when I do it that it does make sense. So now we've identified terms and we know what a coefficient is. If you watch the video about standard form, you understand that this is a little group. It's a little group of x squared terms. And you understand that this is a little group of x terms. And you understand that this is a little group of constant terms. So now we're going to see just how easy it is to add in algebra, and your mind's going to be blown. The first thing I always want you to do is put the expression into standard form. If you don't do that, there's a good chance you could get confused. If you do it, you're going to be fine. This one's already in standard form. So now I can see my little groupings, my x squared and my x squared. I'm just going to make a little x squared group. And that group is going to have a coefficient that is 2 plus 1. What's 2 plus 1? Well, it's 3. So now I have successfully added these two terms. In order to add them, they must have the same variable part. They must be in the same little group. See, x squared and x squared. You understand that from standard form. You deliberately put the x squareds at the front. So that's how come you can add them. You're going to consolidate or combine them into just one x squared term. So here I had 2x squareds. Here I had 1x squared, which made a total of 3x squareds. Isn't that easy? Okay, look at this. Negative 3 and positive 1. Well, first of all, this is the x group, okay? And what am I going to do here? I'm going to do negative 3 plus 1. Just leave out the variables. Look, negative 3 plus 1. What is it? Well, negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. Okay, so the coefficient of my x group is negative 2. Okay, what's going to be my constant? Well, my constant is negative 1 plus 1. Well, negative 1 and positive 1, when you put them together, when you do negative 1 plus 1, you end up with 0. Now 0 could be positive or negative, but for the purposes of this video and for the purposes of most of the time, we'll just throw it down as a positive. It's not a huge deal. Or at least in this case, it's not a huge deal at all. Okay? All right. So I'm looking now at 3 terms. I have an x squared term, which I combined from my original terms up here. I have a negative 2x term, which I combined from these 2x terms right here. And I have a 0, a plus 0, that I combined from negative 1 and positive 1, my constants. As you can see, it's already in standard form, which is great because that's like our official, okay? There's only one other rule, which is if you come up with a coefficient of 0, kind of like I did here, get rid of that term, okay? Now there's a fancy reason why, and I could go into explaining it, but for your final answer, don't put any terms that contain a coefficient of 0 or any constant terms that are 0. Okay, we don't want those. 3x squared minus 2x. This is my final answer. Okay, I'll put a little orange circle around it so it looks a little different. This is what I call my final copy. Okay, you could almost think of this one as a draft. Okay, you did a draft copy, kind of like in English class, you do a draft before you do your final copy, right? Well, your draft included that plus 0 because it's obvious that negative 1 and positive 1 make plus 0, okay? But for our final answer, we need to simplify a little more by getting rid of the zeros, okay? And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it, and perhaps I could make another video about it another day. But for right now, we just need to know that rule, that anything that has a coefficient 0, we get rid of it. Okay, so this is my final answer, 3x squared minus 2x. That's it. You cannot add anything else. Now, someone's going to say, should I do 3 minus 2? No, you cannot, because this is an x squared and this is an x. So they're different groups, apples and oranges. You cannot add them up, okay? So basically, we are done. In algebra, that's something I notice students have a hard time understanding when they're done. If you can't go any further, then you're done. And right now, as I'm telling you, you cannot go any further. Okay, so let's go ahead to the next example. Okay, so here we're going to go through 3 steps. And in these 3 steps, we're going to do our whole little process here. Okay, so step number 1 is going to be identify my terms. Step 2 is put the terms into standard form. As I said, always do that. Okay, so move the terms into standard form. Okay, so we're going to move them around. I just moved the screen, so don't freak out. All the stuff is still up there. I'm just moving it to give myself a little more paper to work with. Okay, so again, what am I going to do? I'm just going to take a look at my groupings. I still like to identify the terms, and I think you should too if you're a beginner. So now we're up to step 3. Step 3 is add and subtract by variable group. Here's my x squared group. Here's my x group. Whoops, excuse me. There's my x group right there. And then at the back, I have my constant group. Well, the first thing I should do is put in my implied ones. So there's a 1 there, and there's a 1 there. Okay. Now everybody has a coefficient, so we're happy. This is my x squared group. Well, what number am I going to put in front of my x squared? Well, what is 1 minus 1? 1 minus 1 is 0, so I'll put a 0 here. Okay, my next term should be my x term. Okay, here I only have one number. It's positive 3. Okay, so I have here a 3. And guess what? It's 3. But since it's not the first term, okay, right now I have a 0x squared in front. I'm going to go ahead and put positive 3. You cannot forget to put the signs. As I said before, you cannot just put, you cannot, absolutely not, just put 3x. If it's not the lead term, it must have its sign. Otherwise, you're going to mess things up really badly, and you don't want that, okay? It's a very simple rule to follow. What about this one? Negative 5 minus 1. Negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6, okay? Now, you might say, I'm not the greatest at positives and negatives, Mr. Grossi. Well, to be honest with you, you don't have to be. It's possible to do these little arithmetics with just a calculator. Negative 5 minus 1, and you'll see negative 6. Okay, so let's identify our terms again. You notice how often I do this? It must be kind of important, right? Always, always, always identify your terms. Okay, now in the previous slide we said, well, this one is going to be considered like my draft copy. And what was my little rule that I had? Yeah, that's right. Anything that has a coefficient of 0, I need to get rid of. So this whole term is gone. See how easy it was to get rid of a whole term? You didn't have to start thinking about, well, multiply this and that. No. Any term whose coefficient is 0, just get rid of it. And that's going to present your final answer to you. Look, 3x minus 6. I hope no one asked where that plus sign went. This is now the lead term because the 0x got taken away. Okay? So this is my lead term now, therefore it has the implied positive sign. This is now my final answer. And that would be what I'd call my final copy. And that is how you add and subtract in algebra. Okay guys, I hope you learned something today and enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click the bell icon, and whatever else YouTube has come up with. And also to visit the website where math is for everyone, www.grossimath.com. Have a great day.